Good morning and welcome to the Sparks of Ingenuity podcast. If you haven't heard episode 1 yet, go on over to my episode list and check that out. Kind of explains who I am and what I'm doing here. But in this episode, we are going to talk a little bit about my horse. Anyone who knows me knows that I own a horse and I derive some inspiration from him. But he also is a pretty funny creature. My horse is an off-the-track thoroughbred, and for those of you who don't do horses, don't know anything about that or what that means, essentially my horse is a thoroughbred, which is a breed of horse, and they're typically used and bred for racing, and he was a racehorse. He actually won a number of races, and until he had a terrible starting injury, he was a pretty decent racer, actually. And anyway, he had a starting injury and was no longer able to race, so he was retired. Frequently, people don't buy these horses. They have a lot of problems. They don't have a very long lifespan. They're usually not ideal for new riders or anything like that, so people aren't really a fan of these horses after they come off the track. They usually have a lot of bad habits and no training in terms of dressage, Western or English, anything like that you could use them for. They can't usually do trail rides because they're usually not very spooky horses, which is good. They're calm in terms of they don't get scared by a whole lot, but they're very high energy, so they're just not very popular for a lot of riders, unless they're more experienced riders. Not usually a first horse pick, but I'm crazy. I've mentioned this before. So he's my first horse. I have been riding for a number of years, but he always seems to have a problem. Although right now he's doing quite wonderfully, and I honestly I'm not complaining in any way, shape, or form. But, he's a thoroughbred, so he's bound to have a little bit more of those ligament, foot issues, things like that. He's had issues with his feet. He has had issues with his stomach. He's just had issues. But, he's doing pretty good now. And this summer, I am starting a new training regiment with him. And it's a process. It takes a lot of time. I go out there at least 2 times a week. At least that's the goal anyway. And anyone who works with horses knows that this is like a minimum. And it's probably not good enough for the training that I want to do, but I'm going to try it anyway because that's all the time that I have with, a small child. And, to top it off, my husband is coaching a girls' soccer team this summer. And he has that 2 days a week until mid-July. So I was like, you know what? If you get to do that 2 days a week, granted you're getting paid for it, but I get to go out and do this horse training 2 times a week. It's 2 weeks into my training with my horse here, and I've been out there twice, not 4 times. This is starting on the 3rd week, and I won't go out there at all this week. So that's how it's going so far. It seems like something always comes up. This Wednesday was my brother's birthday, and this weekend we are taking him on a little excursion for his birthday, and we're leaving tonight at around 4, but that's beside the point. I won't get to go out on Saturday like I normally do because I will be gone on this birthday excursion, and Wednesday was my brother's birthday, and that's normally the day I go out. And of course, because my husband has soccer Tuesday and Thursday this week, or had, I should say, I didn't get to go to the barn. Long story short, that's what it is, being a wife and a mother, I feel like. Not really complaining about it, just is what it is. But anyway, so I'm trying to do this training for my horse, and if you know anything about dressage, equestrian riding, training horses, you do something called lunging, which is where you kind of run the horse in a circle on the ground, and you're standing on the ground giving him or her commands, and they have to follow them and respect you, and they learn boundaries, they learn discipline, they learn to listen, and they learn what different commands mean. They start to stretch their bodies, so they get into a position where they're in shape enough for you to ride them, because holding up your weight and doing the things you want in terms of riding is a lot of work for horses' muscles. And if they don't have any, like my horse who hasn't been ridden in like probably a good 6 months, he has no muscles. So we have to train those. Now, we've started this ground training, this lunging, and my horse has never been good at lunging. His name's Angelo, by the way. Angelo's never been good at lunging. Doesn't have super ground manners, and when you try to mount, which get up on the horse, he gets so excited that he likes to walk away. And it's just a whole battle. But once you're in the saddle and you're riding, he's a wonderful angel. He's quite perfect, honestly, as a riding companion. And he'll try at anything you want him to do, but just not great at ground manners. So this first week, I have a trainer out with me, a person I've worked with for a really long time. She used to be my trainer as well when I worked with other horses, and she is out there, and she's like, okay, this is what I'm doing, whatever, this is what I'm seeing, why don't you do this? Hands me the whip, hands me the dressage rope that he's on, because we're in a very large arena, we're not in a round pen. And he really isn't ready for free lunging. For those of you who know what knows what that means, it just means you don't have them connected to any kind of rope. They just kind of do what they want to do. You have less direction. You can't pull them to where you want them to go. They need to have a little bit more discipline in order to do this. And he's just not ready for it. So anyway, she hands me all the stuff, walks aside. And I get him started, get him going, and she's like, okay, ask him to trot now. And the command for a trot is like a clicking sound. It's called the cluck. But I guess this can kind of vary with rider too, but I give him the trot command, and he decides that he's going to not want to work for me today, and he turns around like he's going to buck. That's when a horse lifts its butt to you and starts kicking, but he turns his butt to me like he's going to buck, gets really close, and then backs away. And, you know, he's not a dangerous horse by any means. He wouldn't actually harm anyone. It was more of a threat that he didn't like what I was doing, and he wanted to be naughty and get away with it. So, of course, you know, my horse is a little stinker and decides that's what he's going to do to me. And so the person that I'm working with is just like, you have to get after him. And, like, we took a different approach to his training, and he's been honestly wonderful. His second time that we did it, he was much, much better. But as I'm watching him, and if you stand in the middle of a very small circle and you walk in a very, very small circle, watching a moving object go around and around, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. It gets really, really dizzying really, really quickly. And I just, but anyway, I'm watching him go around and watching him work, and I'm like, you know, it's really interesting how animals are domesticated. And horses have been so long since domesticated that they couldn't live on their own in the wild for the most part. So that's not really where I'm going with this, but when you're working with a horse and trying to train them, it's kind of like working with a 2-year-old. You do things with them over and over and over again until they get so bored that they just don't want to fight you anymore. And a lot of times with 2-year-olds, that doesn't happen. You get tired before they do. But, you know, eventually they grow. As they grow up, they've done it so many times they know what is actually expected of them, because toddlers are actually pretty intelligent. And it's kind of the same thing with horses. You know, you go and you go and you go and you go and you go until they do what you're asking. And a lot of times they know what you're asking. They just don't want to be wrong. So, you know, they won't necessarily do it because they don't want to be wrong, or they know what they need to do and they just don't want to do it. So they're going to fight you. Every horse has its day, just like every kid has their day. And, you know, I'm thinking about this like comparison here. And I was like, no wonder why little kids, you know, when they're younger, they think horses are these like really majestic creatures, and they are. They're beautiful, but they're a pain in the butt, just like toddlers. But, you know, I can remember when I was in like kindergarten, preschool, and horses were always my favorite animal, and I just thought that they were so majestic and so gentle and kind and beautiful, and I could relate to this horse more than I felt like I related to my parents. Like, I knew that they were people, but like horses just had such a connection with me. And I think that a lot of like young girls that like horses, and boys, of course, too, any little kid that likes horses really feels that connection to them in a way that's like, your behavior is my behavior. So we're one and the same. And so, I don't know. I think older kids have this too a little bit. I actually used it as a metaphor when I was teaching. Side story, I got my teaching license. I went to school to be an English teacher, and I taught high school for a year, which, whole long story there. But anyway, I was at an interview for a teaching position that I did end up getting an offer for. And I compared, I was like, the analogy I like to think about with teaching high schoolers is like when you're trying to train a horse. They have their moments, they have their days when they're great and they're wonderful, but those days are usually few and far between. And every other day they have their issue and they have their thing, and you just got to work through it because, you know, with a horse, you're getting something out of it. You're training them to ride or whatever, and you create a bond with them. And students are kind of the same way. Kids are the same way. You are going to have a day where they're going to be great and perfect and amazing, and it's going to be wonderful. And you're going to be like, why can't every day be like this day? But it can't, because that's life. But you're also going to have a day where it's going to be most days, and they're going to try and bucket you. And they're going to try and kick you in the face. And that's just going to be how it is. Whether metaphorically or literally, they will try to kick you in the face. And you just have to remember that the reason that you're doing this is for them. And they won't see it until a long while later. But they may never see it. But you're genuinely trying to help them. So that's, I guess, my bit of encouragement for today is that you may be training a horse or you may be training a child. But remember that most days are going to be pretty rough. However, there's going to be a good day in there, here and there. And in the end, you know, even if they don't turn out so hot, you gave it your all. And that's really the important part. You know, as long as you're doing what's best for them and you're not purposefully trying to damage them, you know, they're going to grow up. And at that point, you can't really do anything else about it. But, you know, you've successfully done something. You've completed training. And that's something great in and of itself. So, try not to feel too bad, moms and dads. It's hard. For those of you who are single, just remember, get yourself a horse. You'll never need kids, because it's basically the same thing. Except you can leave your horse at the barn, and you can't really blame them, because they're animals. You know? It's great. Horses are great, though. Genuinely wonderful companion creatures. If you're ever thinking about getting one, they're very expensive. I would not recommend a thoroughbred because, you know, all the things I said before, but also they always like to get injured, so it's pretty expensive. But I love my horse and I wouldn't change that for anything. I also love my son. And he's not 2 months old. They don't really cause you a lot of trouble. They just keep you from sleeping and they suck the life out of you. In terms of energy, right? Like, if you're breastfeeding, you know what I mean? They literally suck the life out of you. So, yeah. Kids. Anyway, I don't know really what I was going for, other than I draw a lot of inspiration from my child and my horse, and I think one day I'm going to really write a horse into a story. And I don't know where I'm going to go with it, but it's going to be a really interesting story. I'd really like to write memoirs of my horse's life written from his perspective, but from what I know about him, because obviously my horse can't talk, but kind of like a Black Beauty-esque memoir. I don't know. Maybe one day I'll do that. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to share this with your friends if you think that there was something that they'd enjoy. Otherwise, thanks for listening.